Hey guys, and welcome to the Fish Room. I'm Rachel O'Leary, and it's time for a Tuesday tip. This week we're going to talk about setting up a tank specifically for plecos, and even more specifically for my application for Hypancistrus or Ancistrus plecos. I have this 55-gallon here which holds my own personal fish, including Leatacara. Now this tank generally stays pretty warm, about 82 degrees, which is absolutely perfect for the addition of Hypancistrus. I have Leatacara in this aquarium, and while they spawn consistently, they always eat their eggs before I can pull them. So I thought I would make this tank do double duty and set it up more as a Hypancistrus breeding tank. I picked up a group of Hypancistrus contridents that are at adult size, so I'm going to revamp this tank today in order to suit them both. So let's get started. The first thing that I've done, or that I'm going to do, is pull most of this decor out, just in order to rescape it, give it a good cleaning, clean my sponge filters, and then be able to put in all the different caves and structures I have to encourage the Hypancistrus to spawn. So I'm going to get started. Now currently, as I mentioned, this tank is set up mainly for keeping the Leatacara, which are a dwarf cichlid. And so I had a lot of various pieces of driftwood, as well as some flat structures for them to lay their eggs on, which has worked, but not well enough. There's also a bunch of Ancistrus in here that you'll see around. They are a domestic strain, a domestic line bred that I got from a guy in Ohio. And I'm basically just gonna pull all this plant matter and all this yuck. I've been doing a dry season to get them to breed, which is why there's so much mulm. Pull all this stuff out and totally restructure it. So this first part is really, really messy. It simply involves me pulling everything out of the aquarium in order to reset it. Now I'm being especially careful to make sure that there's no plecos stuck in any of the decor that I'm pulling out. Next, I'm just going to really deeply vacuum the aquarium, pull out any leaf detritus, and clean my sponge filters. Now with all the wood I had in here, and with having a bunch of plecos, the bottom of the aquarium is always full of detritus, which really isn't a bad thing for these particular fishes, but I want to get it nice and clean to give me the best start possible. So I've gathered together a bunch of supplies which are good for plecos, which are round caves with a pinched end, a bunch of tiles and some pieces of slate. And I'm draining the tank down pretty low so that I can access the bottom of it easily. Now things are a bit murky because I just pulled out my sponge filters and put them in a bucket and squeezed them out really aggressively to remove any mulm. Pretty soon this will settle down, and then I'll be able to easily vacuum out any collected mulm from the water column. So the first thing that I'm going to do, or the first thing that I think about when I'm setting up an aquarium for breeding fish, is what is it like where the fish breed in the wild? And with Hypancistrus, that means river systems that have pretty high oxygenation, very warm water, and a lot of rocks with nooks and crannies. Now in our aquarium, luckily for us, there are quite a few really skilled hobbyists that make specific caves for these critters that makes life really easy, because you see how these guys breed is that the male traps the female inside a tight fitting space. The female lays the eggs, the male fertilizes them, kicks the female out of the cave, and then guards the eggs until they're free swimming. So what you want to do to encourage these guys to breed is set up a whole lot of caves and tight nooks and crannies that will encourage them into this behavior. Now this is similar for both Ancistrus and Hypancistrus plecos. What I like to do is align a whole lot of different size and shape of caves all along the aquarium, and I like to do it so that the holes are facing out. And the reason I do that is so that I can take a flashlight and spy on them to see if there's eggs in the cave. And I put them, you know, maybe 1 to to 2 inches apart. And then I stack pieces of slate or ceramic tiles on top, and then you can do multiple layers. Now in the wild, there aren't really any plants or driftwood so much. However, you can use driftwood for nooks and crannies. For my purposes, I'm just going to do this pretty controlled area over here of caves and some smooth river rocks. Now it's important to have at least 1 cave for every fish, every pleco in the aquarium. So what I like to do is just sort of create little hides everywhere, and I'll utilize some rocks as well as some of these tiles and occasionally some driftwood to achieve this. What's important, or exceptionally important, is that you make sure whatever you put in here is extremely sturdy, so that if the fish, you know, get a little bugaboo, they do not end up damaging themselves by darting around and knocking over any of the decor. So when you're growing out plecos, it's still important to have all these structures, but it's not as important to have the actual caves until they hit closer to maturity. 5 or 6 Hypancistrus contradents in here. I have at least 6 caves, and then building up a bunch of different areas for them to inhabit. Now it's also important that you leave access to your sponge filters. You want to make sure that you're going to be able to remove that filter in order to clean it. Now I'll put a piece of wood over top of these structures in order to provide them a little more comfort. Now it's also important to note that in the wild there is no real plants with these guys, so those are totally optional. In fact, these guys kind of prefer things totally in the dark. So any plants you add will definitely be for your satisfaction, not your plecos. As you can see, these guys are already checking out their new digs and are pretty excited about all these caves. You can see they're absolutely gorgeous, this fish. And I've kept them in the past and bred them in the past. I'm excited to get such a beautiful big group again in order to work with. Now with Ancistrus also really enjoy wood, both to graze on and to hide in. So I've made sure to incorporate this large structure of driftwood for them. And the Hypans will use it some too, but they really prefer these rocky caves. So since I have both in here, this is what we're working on. And the Hypancistrus will also utilize the flat surfaces of the wood. Now I've made sure to keep my sponge clears nice and open so that I can get to them in order to maintain them properly. You can see the Hypancistrus swimming around as well. Now normally I would recommend keeping everything in a species tank to breed. But for now, I am limited on space in my fish room, believe it or not. So we're going to try and keep all these together and see how it goes. A lot of times what happens when you breed fish in the same tank is one spawning will trigger another to spawn. So again, just to recap, I have turned my sponge filters all the way up. You can see how big that bubble output is. And that's critically important for the Hypancistrus, as they come from very dilute, very clear waters in river systems. A lot of people think that they need a great amount of flow, but the truth is they really just need a lot of oxygen content. And utilizing oversized sponge filters can certainly achieve this. There's still a fair amount of detritus in the water column from me doing an 80% water change. They all want that one square cave. It's pretty funny. But by leaving space in between the caves, they can utilize the caves, in between the caves, or the underside of rocks. As you can see, this one likes the spot in between the cave best. Now the thing with pleco tanks is that they're not always very attractive. We can do what we can to sort of hardscape with some of the wooden rocks and make it more visually appealing, but what's important to these plecos is that they have a lot of hiding spots and dark spots to get away from everything and just do what they do, which is hide. A happy Hypan is one that you don't really see. I'll be interested to see which one of these guys sets up shop where. So I've let it settle down for about 20 minutes and you can see everything's looking really clear. So just to recap on what you want to think about or the considerations you need to take when setting up a breeding tank for plecos is how do they breed? With the Hypancistrus, like the Contradens in this aquarium, they really like tight nooks and crannies because they come from rivers which have a lot of jumbled rocks where they hide in between the crevices in order to spawn. Now, Ancistrus tend to have more wood in their environment, so I've also included that. But regardless of what you choose to set up your pleco breeding tank, you need to make sure that the structure is really, really sound so that it cannot topple over when you're doing maintenance or just through the fish's natural rambunctiousness. It's important to over-filter pleco tanks because they are poop machines, and they, like with the Hypancistrus, they're meat eaters, so that can really affect your water quality. Make sure that you leave your filters in a spot that you can easily clean and maintain them. With these species, there's not really any plants in their native environment, so I've only left in this one dish of a lotus that I have, simply because I have nowhere else to put it. And to keep these fish in particular very warm. This tank is about 82 degrees, which is actually on the low end of what is recommended for them. So in my next pleco video, I'll talk to you a bit more about nutrition and what to feed these guys in order to get them spawning. I hope you find this video useful. I'm really enjoying working with all these plecos again, and I hope that you guys will be inspired to try some that you may have thought were out of your realm as well. Another thing that I forgot to mention is substrate. Now, I tend to use very, very little substrate in these aquariums, and that's so that I can keep things as clean as possible. I do have a spattering of a small, fine, natural gravel in here, but sand is also appropriate as long as you can keep it really, really clean. Since they're not substrate spawners, it's not that important to worry about the substrate. However, it is said that a lot of times fry do poorly on a bare bottom aquarium, which is why I've included some fine gravel in this one. As you can see, setting up a pleco tank is really not that complicated, as long as you pay attention to their needs. They can be exceptionally rewarding to breed and super fun fish to keep, especially if you like spending time staring into your aquarium. As always, thanks so much for your continued support. Let me know below what types of plecos you guys are working with and what sort of information you'd like to see about them in the future. I do have a feeding video planned, as well as one on some of the specific species that I've encountered in this hobby. As always, make sure you hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos.